Welcome to the Act React podcast, where we explore improvisation through conversations with remarkable artists. I'm the host, Daniel Burkholder, a dance artist living here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the ancestral and unceded lands of the Ho-Chunk, Menominee, and Potawatomi peoples. And I'm truly excited to share with you today's conversation with Rhiannon. I didn't know Rhiannon before this conversation, as she was suggested as a possible guest for this podcast by Ruth Zipporah. The two of them have collaborated many times over the last couple decades. And of course, any suggestion from Ruth is one I take seriously. Rhiannon is a wonderful vocal artist whose experience with improvisation is extensive, as you'll hear in our conversation. And it was really quite wonderful getting to know her a bit through this conversation. Before we jump into that conversation, here is a bit more about Rhiannon. Rhiannon is a vocal artist with a vision of music as a vehicle for innovation, healing, transformation, and social change. A vibrant, gifted singer, performance artist, composer, and master teacher, Rhiannon has been bringing her unique and potent blend of jazz, world music, improvisation, and storytelling to audience for over 4 decades, paving a unique path as an independent artist. Collaborations have included the all-women's jazz ensemble Alive, a cappella ensembles SoVoSo and WeBe3, with Bobby McFerrin and Voicestra and Gimme5. The instrumental trio Spontaneous, duets with pianist Laurence Hobgood, and improvised performances with Japanese dancer Shizuno Nasu. The ocean regards us all as one. Rhiannon's book about her life and teaching methods, Vocal River, The Skill and Spirit of Improvisation, was published in 2013. Rhiannon lives and works on her farm on the Big Island of Hawai'i, currently building a teaching performance space, Ha Lau Leo Nani, the gathering place, honoring culture and community. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, and let's begin. Hi, Rhiannon. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
You're so welcome. Good to be here.
Yeah. Ruth Zipporah kind of connected us. And after about a year ago, I talked with her about her practice. And then I asked, is there anyone else I should talk to? And her response was immediately, I should talk with you. You're like, she's like, yes, you have to talk to Rhiannon. So I'm excited to have this conversation. Kind of the first question I ask everyone is, could you offer some kind of reflection or insight in how improvisation is in your life right now, in your work, in your daily life, however improvisation shows up for you kind of right now, these days?
I would say everywhere, as I would talk to my students about it. The practice seems to involve the music, but in fact, it's really meant to be everywhere all the time. Because for me, improvisation means choice, options, possibilities, being able to look in a new direction when the direction you're going in is not working. And that can apply to so many parts of life, including the madness we're living in on the planet these days, trying to figure out how to adjust and be flexible.
Yeah. So maybe let's just go ahead and jump in and talk about, like, how does that show up for you when you're performing? How, like, developing choice, having options, how do you kind of negotiate in the real kind of in the moment, making those choices?
Well, it's I I was trained as a jazz musician, and then diverted from there because I wanted to let go of the forms to having both vocal and instrumental ensembles that didn't use any charts at all. So I think the question you're asking is, how do we approach the performance? And the answer would be empty.
Empty.
Yeah.
Could you say more about that? Like, how do you arrive at that state of emptiness or being empty?
Well, I make a promise to myself and not to not I make a promise to myself to physically warm up during the day, to be as something about sweating and physical activity can really clear the mind.
Yeah.
And then I vocally warm up so that my instrument is able to move through my range.
Yeah.
But when I actually begin, the idea is to be empty
Hmm.
so that there's no rocks in the road. That's how I used to feel when I was doing concerts where there were song form, there was song form, there was also improvisation. I
Yeah.
would feel like if I knew those song forms were there, I would always be wondering when I was going to perform those, what would be the right time. As soon as those all went away, it felt cleaner, like anything could happen. The agreement I make when I'm working with instrumentalists or singers is that I want different people to start. I don't want to be the one who would start everything,
Yeah.
because the entry place is half the piece.
Yeah.
And if everybody enters, we have all these diverse entry spots. I started singing with Bobby McFerrin about 40 years ago.
Hmm.
And he was a great teacher in that way, because I've watched him up close in front of huge audiences. And he does the same thing he does when we're in rehearsal, which is he calms himself. We stand backstage in a circle, and uh, we're in silence, but we're in this kind of prayerful moment of committing ourselves to the very best that we can bring to this moment. And then we go on stage and empty as possible. And how it starts is how it starts.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really lovely. I love the thought of when you're performing, I assume, especially because when you're kind of like directing or organizing or facilitating the performance happening, you are also making sure that you have other starting places. So everyone's not always looking towards you, but it becomes more
Right.
of a more equal collaboration. Even, I mean, I've been in the situation where like I'm the one organizing everything and securing things and doing stuff, but I don't, but artistically I don't want to be in the lead in that same way. And so finding that
Exactly.
balance between, yeah, I got the gig, but we're all doing the gig.
Well, because I have to, that assumes that I'm trusting the people I'm on stage with to be present and skilled and intuitive, and I do.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be on stage with them. And that means I'm thrilled by the ideas that they come up, which are not the ideas I would come up with.
Yeah.
Just offers us a lot more options. And in terms of instruments, if the bass player comes in, it's something I couldn't even negotiate in my instrument. So
Yeah.
it's going to take it to an entirely different place. I also think it's great to figure out how to initiate an improvisational piece, and also how to join an improvisational piece.
Yeah. Oh, that is an interesting. Yes, I've been I've been off stage, standing there watching someone start and thinking it might take me a while before I join into this thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes. Uh, I love that moment, because I have to figure out how to contribute, not to initiate, but to contribute. Those are really different skills. And I think some people are better than one than at another. So when we're working in studio, I I I really want everybody to learn how to do both things.
yeah, yeah. I like that word contribute. I often talk about initiating and supporting the thing, but
Mhm.
contributing is also another word that fits in there really nicely. You mentioned trust and having trust with your fellow musicians, your fellow collaborators. Um, I know part of that is like knowing someone and seeing someone and knowing that they're skilled or experienced or something like that. But there's also something about developing that trust as a group or as even just individually with another person on stage or through rehearsals. How do you have a sense of how that develops for you? Like when you know, when you get to the place where you know you can feel like you can trust someone in performance. Is there
Well,
a
it's, yeah. For example, with Ruth,
sure?
she and I have done performances maybe even longer than 40 years. We met each other in the Bay Area and started working together, both observing each other and then doing some performances together and then learning how to teach together. But she's, I know her deeply as a friend,
Hmm.
which adds enormously to my trust of her on stage. And if you know Ruth, you know that she's going to tell you the truth.
Yeah,
She's not going to sugarcoat it or beat around the bush. She's going to tell you what she observes.
yeah,
And I deeply trust that.
yeah,
Not to mention, she has a really beautiful aesthetic and a whole lifetime of creating pieces.
yeah.
Uh, so, and then there's another dancer I work with named Margie Gillis, who lives up in Montreal. And the same goes for her. As we became friends, the work just deepened. With her, I felt like I needed to not watch her while we were performing together.
Huh?
It, with dancers, if I start watching them too much, I can get caught in their track.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
And so sometimes I on purpose turn away from them and try to just feel them and follow my own through line as a singer. And as I watch the videos of it afterwards, that seems to work often very well because
yeah.
we know each other, and then I'm not getting pulled in to their beautiful work, but really able to go alongside it.
Yeah.
If I'm with the singers, I have a training called All the Way In, which lasts for a year. People come and study with me for a week at a time. Then we have homework and we meet on Zoom and the more homework, and then we meet again live. And so over the year, uh, the trust begins to develop. And I do a lot of exercises that have to do with trust, because you're right, you can't really do this work successfully without that. You can meet somebody you've never met before, but I think even then you have to make an assumption that you're both doing this for the good of the work and the world,
Yeah.
and you launch in with a kind of implicit trust that it will work. But if you know them and you know things about them, it can help enormously.
Yeah. It's really true. There is something about, like, as you said earlier, just improvisation is like all around us, right? Like we're improvising right now in this conversation and stuff like that. And there's something about when you're going to be improvising with someone else, if you also experience like walking down the street with them or cooking a meal with them or like
Exactly.
spending like traveling together and having to negotiate how all that works, like you just
Or arguing.
are arguing, yeah, figuring out how to have the argument and then come back from it, and like that
Uh-huh.
all of a sudden builds this like much more solid place.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's fun to meet someone just like spontaneously, you're at, I don't know, I've been at a festival and they're like, oh, you two perform together, and you get up and something can kind of spark and happen, but
Mhm.
it's not that deep richness that you feel with someone with that kind of history that you have with them. So you
Yeah, but also it can
yeah.
be counterly. Uh, Sometimes I've improvised with somebody I don't know, but they know the same improvising work.
Hmm.
Uh, and the magic of that is especially profound because it's coming from really kind of, I would say, a soul level, because you don't have a friendship to base it on.
Yeah.
So it can be very magical. I love that about improvisation, that
Yeah.
it is a set of When Ruth and I realized that even though we were in different forms, we were actually heading in the same direction. I mean, if you look at the way we teach, it looks very different.
Yeah.
The final product of working in that way is very similar. So when we performed together, it had that kind of magic right from the beginning. Like, I don't know how I know what you're doing or what you're about to do, but I can feel we're going to be able to go there together. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that our friendship was greatly deepened by improvisation.
Yeah.
Rather than the other way around.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You bringing up Ruth Sapora again and thinking about movement, and I was struck reading your book and making my way through it. I didn't get through all of it quite, but I did get through quite a bit of it. And you talked about your dad dancing, and I have the experience of my father being an avid ballroom dancer, and his father being an avid square dancer. So I always talk about coming from a lineage of men who dance, and reading about your experience of seeing your dad dance after like also seeing him being so physical at the farm. And after I read that, I was kind of reading later and I was struck in the exercises. The first thing you have them, the very first exercise in your list of exercise is to dance.
Exactly.
It's a
Well,
thing,
because
so yeah.
Singers are not trained to move well. They're trained to stand still, and in the early days, it would even be about how they held their hands or their kind of upright posture in the crook of the piano. That there was a lot of protocol to it all.
Yeah.
But of course, my life with my mom and dad, who danced together and separately, but I just always loved dancers. And so as I started working with my singers, I saw how much they needed it as well. And it's a simple thing. You get your bodies warmed up, you get sweating, it's just even on that physical level, but you also start moving around each other and exploring space and figuring out how to articulate parts of the body so that you're not a block.
Yeah.
Because for singers, it changes the whole nature of the sound. Once the body is activated, you can get sound further and further down in your body until finally the whole body is involved in making the sound rather than the apparent apparatus, which is the lungs and the vocal cords. And
right. The diaphragm is important, but it's not the only thing, kind of thing.
exactly.
Right?
No, it's got to be down in the hips. It's got to be in all those soft tissue organs. It's got to be down in the legs. And of course, there's all the memory that bodies hold that's so expressive, even if you're not directly addressing it in words. There's a way that who we are and all the experiences we've been through affect the way we move. So I started with my the singers that come to All the Way In, where I have them for longer, working on a project that starts with a piece called Murmuration, which is the starlings that fly by the hundreds in the sky.
Oh yeah.
Beautiful shapes.
Yeah.
So I know that dancers have used that idea, moving across the floor together.
Yeah.
So I watched that and I got the idea of doing that with the singers, but they would make a move that would have a sound with it. Ideally, it would be a 2 or 4 bar phrase would have a musical interest, and they would all make the sound and movement and move across the floor and navigate how to harmonize that, perhaps, or to create an interlocking pattern so that there would be 2 groups moving, just to get them understanding how to move together and calm down. Because one of the things about improvisers is they're always thinking about the next thing. Where am I now? Where am I now?
Yeah.
And the murmuration somehow calms that all down so that you just get interested in this unified movement. Singers talk about unison as a kind of holy place. They say in a lot of the old indigenous and village cultures around the world that you can zip open the horizon and see into other realms if in unison. That power of that single vibration is so strong. You like open it up, and I have the experience of wanting to do that more and more. So the murmuration is this unison as in the body as well. And then we've taken that further into a thing called immersion, in which we go for 45 minutes to an hour, where we just enter the space and we do these murmurations, but they lead to, oh, there's a duet that wants to happen. Everybody else will understand and they will leave the space or create a space for that to happen. So it's a flowing, movement oriented, we're not trying to be dancers.
Yeah.
But we are learning the power of the body and voice together.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm just latched on to the next 10, 20 years of my life's work, which is to explore how that happens, because then they're not only saying, they're not only, well, they're choreographing. They're understanding generosity, when to enter, when to leave, how often to come in, how, oh, that's been enough for me, let me go off, how to join a big group, how to stand in front and be solo, how to join a trio, all kinds of subtle group dynamics that are really important in developing an improvised performance. Because as you know, the more you can free flow performance, the less you have to stop and start again, or stop and start again.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. I know having experienced and led to a little bit of, from the opposite side, being a dancer, moving and say, oh, now as you move, vocalize what you're moving, Exactly. And it's often not singing, it's just noises or percussive noises or whatever, some kind of vocalization, and how dancers are often very timid about that. But when we can get to a place where we're really committed, it also changes the movement, right? Having the sound changes the vibrate, right? Because of the vibrations and just activating more of ourselves, it can create a more fullness with the movement.
Exactly.
And even after we stop vocalizing, that fullness can still be present.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Margie Gillis, who's up in Montreal, her dancers come over, have for 2 winters come over during the hard Montreal winter, and come to Hawaii and done a lot of movement voice work, because Margie's idea is that there's more vocalizing, and maybe not even just sounds, but actual held pitches, and exploring which ones of the dancers feel stronger about it. And it's going to be the same. Some of them will do more, some will do less, but if everybody has the feeling that it's part of their artistic expression, it will just be a bigger field of play.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really wonderful. We've kind of touched on this already, but one thing I did want to just ask you about is a little bit of like kind of the importance of collaboration and how that offers opportunity. You mentioned being empty and then having other people start, so there's a space that other people will offer new possibilities. And I'm thinking, of course, I was reading some of like when you had the all-woman jazz group, and of course working with Bobby McFerrin, and like you had all these groups, WeBe3, like you mentioned, that kind of, so you have all these kind of groups that you've been a part of, that assuming that kind of work is really important, and that has informed your practice.
It's everything.
Yeah.
It's everything. I feel very, very fortunate to have had these long-term collaborations. Those ones you mentioned are all still active. I I started my artistic life in San Francisco during the early 70s,
Yeah.
which was a hotbed of improvisation on every level. Every artistic form was improvising. So I had a lot of early lessons in doing that. And I realized the longer you can get a collaboration going, the more chance there is to deepen the expression. So I actually don't like performing alone. I tried it for a while. I
Uh-huh.
tried doing solo improv evenings, and I think some of them were successful, but they made me terribly, terribly nervous.
Yeah.
And when I'm going on stage with other people, I don't really feel that. I feel this excitement because we're all holding it together. So
Yeah.
I like performing with my students, uh, any of my other collaborators. I always hope that it's going to turn into a long running collaboration. For example, Laurence Hobgood, who's a beautiful pianist, he and I have done some tours together.
Oh,
He,
nice.
Margie and I are now talking about, we've begun a
Yeah.
piano, a dancer, and a singer all improvising,
Yeah.
sometimes solo, sometimes duets, sometimes a trio.
Yep.
And that feels really thrilling to me. Uh, I yeah, I think I answered your question. Yeah,
Yeah.
collaborations, they're we're communal sort of
Hmm.
creatures,
Yeah.
dancers and singers and musicians for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so doing it all alone, eh, it's okay. It's good for practice, but
Right.
to find out what's going on with the other people and adapt and adjust and be flexible,
Yeah.
I find that very rewarding.
Yeah. So this idea of being in relation or in relationship brings to mind some of the other stuff that I was kind of looking at and really curious about is being outside in nature. And what I really appreciate about that is that you describe the challenges of it as well as kind of the beauty and the kind of, to use a word, holiness of it in a way. Um, and just I've done a fair amount of performing out in nature and stuff like that. And like, yeah, you trip over the uneven ground and like you scrape up your arm and things, things happen. It's not always um, this kind of mystical experience, but then sometimes it is. So what draws you back, even with those challenges, what draws you back outside?
Because she is the great improviser. Nature, that's and without subjective analysis,
Mhm.
just doing. I was raised on a farm, so therefore it began there. I played a lot by myself
Mhm.
out in the fields and pastures and woods. And I've taken my students on, you saw in the book, but like
Yeah.
any number of mostly successful, sometimes terrifying, uh, trips into the high desert in New Mexico, the Rogue River in springtime, high water. Uh, I'm just outside with them as much as I can. There are times when you want to be indoor, you want the smooth floor and you want the acoustics of a closed building and all that. But uh, I really want to balance that with being out where the experience of nature moving and adapting and adjusting and correcting. For example, when they're in Hawaii, I always take them to see the volcano. Pele
Mhm.
is the name the volcano has here on our island. And they're changed by that.
Mm.
I take them to an old eruption from the 60s, and there's a huge expanse that has all these formations and these places where the lava has cracked and broken away, and down inside it's pink. So color, shape, form, silence, a kind of expanse that there's no way you can get that inside a room.
Mhm.
So I would say my studio on my farm here is 1,000 square foot studio, which is open pretty much three sides.
Okay.
Big open doors. We don't even have screens on those. So it's just big open. So the trade winds are blowing through. The whole experience is meant to remind us constantly of our part in the great improvisation of life.
Does being outside or even in your studio with all the doors open and stuff like that, does that change like the technique of how you have to sing? Like, does that change how you're singing or how you're using your body to sing?
Well, if we're indoors, the studio has good acoustics, so it doesn't change because the roof line is still the
Okay.
same, the walls,
Yeah.
what makes the acoustics happen is still the same.
Yeah.
That's the trouble with singing outside. You've got to adapt. I can remember this time when I lived in Point Reyes for a long time, north of San Francisco, and without knowing what I was doing, I took a group out to the sand dunes leading up to a beach, and I had the idea we were going to sing in the dunes and we were going to go out to the beach. So we get in the dunes and there it's like dead. This sand is so heavy and thick. Like we couldn't, there was no acoustic at all. The wind's blowing. So we
Yeah.
couldn't hear each other. We couldn't get any. Then we went out to the beach and I had not calculated for high tide. So A, there was hardly any beach. And B, the sound of the tide coming in overwhelmed
Yeah.
anything. So I learned right away that I had to make a collaboration with nature. I couldn't just go and impose myself and the
Yeah.
singers in a natural setting. When we went down that river, the Rogue River, it was very dangerous. It was
Uh-huh.
high water. People were constantly spilling into the river and having to be saved. And lots of times by the end of the day, all I could do was sob that
Mm.
we had not actually had a death that day. I mean, like it was just huge. My misunderstanding of how of actually what we were doing there. I think the improvisation of that was more just listen to the river, just make it down to the bottom. Don't try to do big singing. We probably
Yeah.
would have been better off to sing just at the end of the day on the banks of the
Yeah.
river.
Yeah.
No, you can't underestimate nature's power and uh, dimension. So I just have learned so many humbling, so many humbling experiences.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, again, I dancing outside, like I think about like the dance forms that I'm mostly trained in, which comes from this kind of Western theatrical tradition, right? Modern, some ballet, like contemporary forms, but the difference in how the body is used because you're basically on a flat floor, would be wood or some kind of other kind of flat dance floor, and thinking about forms of dance that were created on the sides of a hill or on rocky ground, or
Yeah,
like
yeah.
like the technique of moving would be different. It would you can't do a tendu or something in like sand or a grass. I mean, that just wouldn't happen. That
Mhm.
wouldn't develop. So how do I change my body to honor the environment that I'm in, as opposed to trying
Yeah.
to impose these other ideas onto it, right?
I have a couple of dancer friends here on the island who were trained in hula and
Mhm.
have lived here for a long time. So we sometimes go just to be together for dawn at one of the beaches. And the beaches on the Big Island are often have a lot of lava on them. They're not the
Okay.
sandy, groovy paradise
Yeah.
entry. You have to pay attention. So for the dancers, it's all about uh, how do you dance on lava? How slowly can you move so that you don't hurt yourself
Mhm.
or disrupt the situation? So maybe just getting across the beach is your dance.
Yeah.
And that kind of adjustment is, uh, I feel like the arts are altogether a humbling experience because they're so enormous.
Mhm.
All that can be learned, it's never ending, it's all of a lifetime. And sometimes the lessons are bigger than others.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you collaborate with nature, you're going to increase your capacity for humbling. It's because she's a very big participant in it.
Yeah.
If I'm on the beach and it's windy, I can't compete with that.
Mhm.
I have to sing in my own self in the best way I can without trying to compete
Yeah.
with nature.
Yeah. 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 That's right. I certainly always love whatever kind of art form it is, when it's trying to be put into a more natural environment that is not trying to outdo it, and it's just trying to like be a part of it, in it, you know,
Exactly.
kind of weave into it. I guess like to what I want to go back to one thing you said earlier, and because I've been kind of like, I think it's been ruminating in there in the back of my head a little bit, and this idea of emptiness. And I mean, I think I know what you mean by it, but I kind of want to like pull it apart just a little bit, uh, because there is this
Great.
like emptiness, but there's also like the collaborators you have on stage, and there's also the venue that you're in, if you're inside or outside or in a big venue or a little venue, and then there's also the whole history of the training that you bring with you, right? So there's all these elements that are present, that maybe is like a ground or a world in which you're inhabiting for that moment. And so the moment isn't empty. The moment is like full of all of these other things that are going to influence you and inform you. Even just knowing that, oh, this performance is supposed to be an hour is a kind of like, here's a frame that you have to step into or something. And so I guess like how does, with your being empty, which I'm kind of assuming meaning without too many preconceived ideas of what you're going to do, without planning, oh, I'm going to start with this kind of sound or melody or something, um, and being open to whatever comes up. But there's also the history of which you bring to that moment and the training that you have had. And can you talk about that kind of balance between tradition, context, and spontaneity?
Well, I'm going to stand by the emptiness,
Please do.
but all that training, and there is a lot of training for me. That's how I got into teaching improvisation, because it was very important to me that improvisation be honored as a form that you study, that as a kind of pedagogy. So I
Yeah.
started to think like, what would I teach first, and what do I normally teach second, and how could I adapt? And so that's where the book came from, and an idea for an improviser that seemed very strange to me at the time I was asked to write a book. So there is all that, the study and the warming up and all of that. But when I walk on stage, that's too heavy a load to have anywhere near my conscious mind.
Oh, sure. Sure.
So it's got to be like kind of in the air around me is this, and somewhere in my the lining of my skin is all this knowledge and awareness. But if I start to attach at all,
Mm,
it's a slippery slope.
yeah.
It really is. So when I started studying with Bobby, that was the condition. We would go on stage. We know nothing, we know nothing, we know nothing, 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 we know nothing, nothing, nothing. And there's one thing to do that alone. It's another thing to do it with 4 other people. In the case of Bobby, we were all a bit saved because we knew he would start.
Ah,
It was his gig.
right, right, right,
So we were in a way the chorus
right.
of him.
Yeah.
And that gave me a bunch of years to learn how to be in an improvisational space in front of thousands of people, but I wasn't the bottom line.
Right.
Then when WeBe3 broke off from that because Bobby was going off to do conducting work, classical music, the three of us thought, well, what if there is no leader? What if we don't know who's going to start?
Yeah.
That was a huge change because we realized how sheltered we'd been in a way by his presence and him holding the bottom line.
Yeah.
With the three of us, it was so raw and so wonderful because we trusted each other hugely, and we had a big palette because we had a bass singer, we had a percussion singer, we had a storyteller, we had all of us being able to sing harmonically and melodically and rhythmically, and it really worked. And the big agreement had to be with the three of us. Empty. Got to be, because if somebody goes out there with something, we're all going to feel it. You know how that is. Even if they don't say, I have this idea I'd like to put in there tonight, you can feel if somebody's got
like an agenda.
Agenda. Or if in the middle of the performance, somebody starts telling a story and you say to yourself, wait a minute, I heard that story before. That's got to be the agreement that we don't go there.
Yeah.
That we veer away from anything that repeats. On the other hand, I feel like there's a kind of tyranny of improvisation. That there's this feeling of I must never ever repeat anything.
Right.
And I actually don't believe that either. I feel like there are ideas that want further examination. My agreement with myself is I just don't go down the same road. But I notice if I'm on the road, then I have to get myself on a side path. But that means having collaborators that you really believe are on that same path. Otherwise, right in the middle of it, they'll start doing something that you know is not improvised, and it really puts a rock in the road. When I work with Laurence, for example, he's such an extraordinary pianist. I have no idea where he gets the ideas that he puts out, but when he does, I feel like this whole world opens up for me that I would never have found on my own as an instrumentalist with 88 keys to choose from. So every kind of collaborative partner we choose has their whole bowl of ideas and intelligence and training, and the more the merrier.
Yeah. No, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking this time this afternoon to talk with me, and really excited to add this conversation to the ongoing mix of conversations that I'm having around improvisation. And it feels like such a rich world of possibilities that everyone is exploring. So thank you so much.
Could I say one more thing?
Please do.
I'm initiating a global vocal improvisation network. Since it is such a trouble to try to get improvisation into the universities, into the conservatories, into the dance programs, into all of that. So I've got 20 singers worldwide who have been helping me since January. We've been having meetings every other week to talk about how to create a website network where people can go on there and find places where there's the kind of improvising they'd like to do. And we should be able to launch the network at the end of this year. And I know it will have links to the dance world and to instrumentalists as well, because we are so bonded to one another, and we all, I believe, suffer from this improvisation lack of information and
Uh-huh.
connection.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for doing this series, because
Yeah.
you're doing a great deal to bring improvisers into a common world.
Yeah. Well, thank you. All right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Take care, Daniel.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Rhiannon. And now please check out some of her recordings. And you can find them on most of the streaming service, and there's some on her website as well. And they are quite varied and wonderful in so many different ways. Also, please have to check notes for links to Rhiannon out in the world and on the web. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to Act React. You can find us on YouTube, Apple and Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbeam, as well as Vimeo. I hope you're able to join me for the next episode with Detroit-based jit dancer Halim Rasul. It's a very different kind of improvisational practice than the one we talked about today, but it was also really, really wonderful to get to know him and his practice. So until then, take care, be well, and live spontaneously.